Hi, so I thought I would share a little bit today about something that often gets missed out from spiritual growth, from personal development, from anywhere where we're trying to create a change or growth within ourselves. And that aspiration is great. It's a really great thing to have in our lives. So this short live is about how our mind can kind of come in and do things that perhaps aren't so helpful within that. So let's say, for example, that we're trying to create more compassion. We're trying to become more compassionate and kind. Something that can happen unconsciously is that our mind can start to repress and deny the aspects that within us that aren't so compassionate, that aren't so kind. And we all have these. But when they get repressed and denied, it's actually not that helpful. When they get forced into shadow, quite often they'll end up leaking out in an unconscious way. It doesn't actually help us to move towards what we're trying to grow into. So this is perhaps the most obvious if we're following a system of ethics. We've got a clear idea of how we want to be, what we want to move into in our lives. But it can be there as well in meditation practice. If we're trying to cultivate mindfulness, we can end up repressing aspects of us that aren't so aware, that are perhaps a bit heady. So I know certainly I've seen this within myself, and I wish that I'd seen it earlier, because it's so crucial to work with this. And the way the mind usually does this, the way the mind kind of helps with this, is through a process of self-judgment, self-criticism. So it lets you know when you're being bad. But interestingly, within a lot of spiritual traditions, even the process of criticism, to be critical, isn't a very sought after thing. And because criticism is one of the things that we want to not be, that itself gets pushed into shadow. So this process of self-criticism itself becomes very unconscious, can be deeply buried. So we're making our progress on our spiritual path. We're outwardly becoming more compassionate. We're making all of these great changes within ourselves that are really good. But internally, there's this process of self-criticism and judgment going on. And of course, if you're doing a practice that involves awareness as well, if you're developing awareness, which is very common in spiritual growth, you're going to start to see more aspects of yourself, which means that this critical process has to work harder, has to tell you what not to be harder. And this can become a complete hell ride, where each time you become aware of a new thing within yourself, there's a kind of beating yourself up, a lack of compassion with yourself. So of course the solution to this is to build awareness of this process of self-criticism that happens within each one of us actually. And usually the roots of this process of judging ourselves, of criticizing ourselves in order to be good, originate from our early childhood. So once we can start to see that process happening, once we have awareness of it, then we can begin to disengage from that critical voice. And we can start to become aware of actually more of what's in our shadow, not to let our shadows act out, but to come into relationship with those aspects of us that haven't been allowed, like anger and sexuality. So we can engage with them and take the resources that lie within those energies. And of course, this process of, which is in itself very uncompassionate, of self-judgment, is at the heart of developing compassion. It's the very key that's under there. So if this sounds interesting, I'm going to be offering a series of lives focusing on this topic, of focusing on self-criticism, on how we can become aware of it and break free of it, so that we can really be ourselves in our lives. So there'll be a link to, I'll put a link to that next to this live.